to press you, yeah. Young fly nigga, I don't follow all these rules, yeah. Bitch, I'm making tunes, I ain't missing, I won't lose. Let's go to an island where the water around is blue, blue, blue. I got 2 bad bitches in the coop, coop, coop. 42 in the bottle, glasses on full too. Ain't no games, I ain't playing, I want you, yeah. Take a trip, let's go shopping, I got blues, yeah. We got options, you could choose. Yeah, you want it, I can buy it, ain't no rules, yeah. I'm just saying, let me help you upgrade you, yeah. Fuck that nigga, he don't care about you, yeah. Girl, move on. He can't treat you like I do, my money too long. I got homies for your friends and we can group on. We are early, hit our shot like Curry. Bitch, I wanna shoot, shoot, shoot like hoops while I'm riding in the coupe. I got what you want, it ain't nothing but a loop. Don't listen to friends, they don't know what's best for you, yeah. I want you, yeah, that.
Hello everyone. This is Omar from the Third Rail. I hope everybody's doing fine. Long time no see. Taking it easy, over the holidays and watching NFL football. You got to be attached to that these last weeks. It's going to be sad when it goes away because I love football. So today's show is a bit simple. I had some stuff set up. And I was watching Piers Morgan about the issue of Tommy Robinson. Tommy Robinson is a Zionist douchebag in Britain who's racist and he hates Muslims. Some stuff you could say, oh, okay, he has the right to say, okay, we agree about some rape, gang rape or grooming. So he's in jail for contempt of the court. It has nothing to do with his documentary. It has nothing to do with Elon Musk is saying, that fucking scumbag in Twitter, who is a racist, who called Arabic the language of hate. And if you know Elon Musk, history is his father is 76 years old. And when he was in his 30s, he adopted a young girl at 4 years old. This is his father. He adopted her. She became an adult at 76 years old. He started whacking her, boom, 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 and he has a baby with her. Isn't that grooming? And you have Elon Musk on Twitter. Oh, we hate these people who groom these people. Your father is the biggest groomer in the world. He's raping his own daughter. Legally, she's his daughter. If you adopted her as a 4-year-old, she's your daughter, man. So you have nothing. So I don't know why I'm saying that. It's just I don't like, his virtual singing. Elon Musk has turned from a genius to an asshole on Twitter. Eventually he's going to get caught in this bullshit he's doing. He's getting a lot of people angry. And all it takes is for his fucking stock to collapse and he'll become broke as fuck. Okay. So we're going to watch. I was watching Piers Morgan show, and it was the most Islamophobic show I've seen. I mean, it was hateful. They have an issue in England in between 1997 and 2000. What was it? 87. I don't know. It's like a decade. There was some gangs of young Pakistani who were grooming girls or having sex with girls or raping, like they say. Some of them went to jail. I was checking on ChatGPT. Those who were jail, some of them went for life. Some of them went for 35 years. Some of them went for 25 years. And the whole idea is they keep on attaching the word Islam to the rapist, as if his dick had a crescent. The Islamic crescent on it? The half moon and the star is on their penises. A rapist is a rapist. A criminal is a criminal. I'm with you. If these people commit these crimes, then the only way to do it is you have to punish these motherfuckers. That's all it is. You understand? Very simple, man. Well, you're not telling you not to punish. You have to punish them. See, I hate this. Okay? So let's see what we're going to see. Let's see. Set it up. What happened? Oh, yeah?
Gaza.
Now, these are the Jewish boys. Okay. So, he had on this drug addict, Jordan Pearson, who's a drug addict and had to be taken to Russia to pump his stomach out and get him back to normal. At the same time, he was condemning drug addicts in the United States and all over the world. Let's start the show. It's a long show. You could hang out with me and stay, but I'm going to go through the whole thing because I need to respond to this garbage over here. Jordan Peterson here, who has become a Zionist shell, and he works, for the Zionist channel, the Daily Wire. Let's go.
That Robinson is not in prison for anything to do with the gang rape scandal.
The primary source of information for me in Canada has been Tommy Robinson, and his insistence on pursuing this. It might be wonderful for us to presume that the person who does that would also be of unimpeachable ethical character on all dimensions simultaneously.
Jordan's responsible for this mess that's going on now. He should be ashamed of himself, because in the UK, we know who Tommy Robinson is. In the US, he has been Tommy Robinson's passport to gaining influence with Elon Musk.
If you want to have an uncomfortable conversation about Islam, it is sort of conducive to pedophilia.
I don't know what planet you're living on or what you're smoking, but I'd suggest that you do a course in religious studies.
Thank you for the ad hominem attacks. I'm sure that means you have a really strong argument, but I think the young working class girls would beg to differ.
Well, the UK's rape grooming scandal, let's call it a rape scandal, not really about even grooming, it's just about people raping young, often underage girls, is a grotesque stain on Britain's standing as a world leader in morality and the rule of law. There's no nuance and no complexity to this. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands of child victims of sexual abuse were denied justice and denied shelter from a state whose primary role it is to protect them, simply in order to avoid, in many cases, stirring racial tensions. Authorities knew exactly what was happening, but they turned a blind eye to the prolonged grooming and rape of largely white children by gangs of mostly Pakistani
white children, huh?
men. We know this because some journalists and some public figures working with brave whistleblowers and victims were refusing to be silenced. The Times newspaper broke the story first back in January 2011 with that dramatic front page. I interviewed one of the original victims and whistleblowers as the host of Good Morning Britain back in 2018.
He was a serial rapist. You weren't his only victim by a long way. He was the ringleader of this infamous child grooming gang in Rotherham, right? I didn't even know that anybody, any rapist, could ever get access to any child born from their appalling actions.
Let alone be invited.
But he was jailed for 35 years, right, for multiple sex offences against 9 Rotherham girls, including you. This isn't just somebody who committed one rape against one person. This is a serial groomer and rapist, the worst type of human being imaginable, preying on young girls as you were, right? What? I mean, this clearly has been. This won't be the only time this has happened, presumably. What should be done to the law to stop this nonsense?
Well, I'm asking for a change in law for the Children's Act 1989 to ensure that no rapist can apply for access to a child conceived through abuse and rape.
So the point is the scandal was covered by mainstream media, both television and newspapers. Not enough, in my opinion, as a journalist. But it doesn't mean also that it wasn't a massive cover-up. It was covered up by almost everyone involved in this. We know that a documentary on the grooming gangs was postponed to avoid aiding the right-wing BNP in local elections. We know a senior police officer in Rotherham, where many of these atrocious crimes took place, told a victim's father the town would erupt if the details came out. We know that in towns and cities across the country, up to 50 of them, authorities had a crystal clear picture of a small section of a community that was ultimately responsible for the vast majority of the most wicked crimes. They were, in the main, British, Pakistani Muslims, almost exclusively. The politicians, law enforcement, local authorities conspired to bury the truth because they were afraid, in many cases, of being labelled racist if they told the truth. Many of these young victims were raped and abused for years because of this culture of conspiracy and fear. That is simply unforgivable, and it must never happen again. Now, the reason why so many people are now demanding...
Okay, first of all, anybody who's responsible for raping children or for grooming any children should be put in jail. There should be no cover-up, whatever they are. My only issue with this story is the way they have framed it. Instead of saying Pakistani minorities were responsible mostly of these rapes or grooming or sexual behavior with young white girls, the whole idea is because they're white and those guys were Pakistani. The majority of the sexual relationship was consensual, but the girls were too young to give that consent. And I agree. But my whole issue here, why are they attaching Islam? That's like saying, well, this year, 50,000 American women were raped, mostly were by Catholics. Those Catholic Americans are criminals. Why do you need to stigmatize a whole 7 or 4 million Muslims inside the British country who are 7% of the population? Let's go at it now.
a full national inquiry, and I'd be one of them. In fact, today, just before I came on air, Elon Musk has replied yes to my post.
Yeah, Elon Musk's father groomed he adopted a girl at 4 years old. When he's at the age of 76, he had sexual intercourse with her, and he had a baby daughter with her. If that's not fucking grooming, I don't know what grooming is. That's the nastiest shit you could ever do. Raise a 4-year-old girl as your daughter until you reach the age of almost 80 years old and start having sex with that young girl and getting her pregnant. Go ahead.
On his platform, X, demanding a national inquiry and demanding Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, order it, is because so little has actually been done with the findings of the previous investigations. And the reason it's become a global story now is because Elon has snapped many people from their inertia on this by amplifying so many horrific details that people may otherwise not have known. And that's where Tommy Robinson comes in.
Yeah,
criminal. People may or may not know my views on Tommy Robinson.
And I just fucked up the whole thing. Then I do this all the time. Hold on. Why do I do this, man? I don't deserve to have a channel. Hold on, give me a second. I'm gonna go back and try to find this without getting up. I hate what I'm doing here. I just pressed the wrong button, man. See? No, I don't want that. Okay. Where's Piers Morgan? Oh, here you go. There he goes. Oh, thank you. Here you go. Okay, give me a second. I got it. I'm so smart and I didn't even know. Okay, hold on. So we going now. The whole idea, what I'm having an issue with is with, I don't want to bore you. If you have time, you're going to watch me. I'm the most boring, untalented individual on YouTube. I'm such a big idiot that I cannot even get my 2.7 million followers to press the word like. They won't even press that, these cheap ass motherfuckers. Okay, let's go. Give me a chance, okay? Where are they? Come on, man. Okay, go.
I think he has a long, very ugly record of brazen race baiting. In my opinion,
okay, hold on.
A very open and transparent hatred of all things to do with Islam.
Thank you.
And consequentially, most Muslims. But whatever his motives, and remember, this guy's been in prison 3 times now for a multitude of crimes and is in prison right now, nothing to do with the rape gang scandal, but everything to do with his sickening lies about a young Syrian refugee, which he then compounded by repeating, despite a court order not to. There's no doubt that, to be fair to Robinson, he has banged the drum about the rape gang scandal for a very long time, and he should be credited for doing that. In fact, he was on Newsnight on the BBC just a month after the Times broke the story with Jeremy Paxman and said this.
Do you know anyone that's hooked on heroin sold to them by Muslim gangs? You probably don't. I do. Do you know any beautiful girls that you went to school with that are now wearing a burqa that don't see their family? Probably don't. I do. Do you know anyone who's been murdered by a Muslim gang? You probably don't. I do. Do you know any 15-year-old girls that you know that you've grown up with that have been raped or pimped? You don't. So I don't expect you to understand the issues.
These are all personal issues of yours.
Personal issues in towns and cities like mine that are happening, and they're not happening with the Sikh community. They're not happening with the Jewish community.
And indeed, they're not happening with most Muslims.
No, they're happening within the Islamic community. This is what I'm saying, that it's an Islamic problem.
Well, he had different keys now. After the front page I showed you earlier, it was the Times that broke this story, that exposed it. They carried on a lengthy campaign. And for the avoidance of doubt, Tommy Robinson, like I said, he's not in jail, as so many in America in particular seem to think, for his whistleblowing about the rape gangs. He's in jail for contempt of court, a crime he's committed many times. It's a crime in America as well. You can be jailed for contempt of court in America. People have been. But many in the US seem to see Robinson as a beacon of truth, who's been pivotal to exposing this evil. I don't see him like that. I believe, as Nigel Farage does, the leader of the Reform Party in the UK, that he's now so toxic and so discredited that he is in fact being used deliberately as a kind of opposition sacrificial lamb, with the precise aim of discrediting those who do want to expose the truth. If they make it all about Tommy Robinson, a lot of people will just go, well, he's awful, therefore we shouldn't listen to anything he says. But actually what he says about the rape gangs then and now has turned out to be truth. And the truth must come out. Lessons must be learned. those accountable must be punished. The Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, must, as I posted earlier today, order a full, no-holds-barred, independent national inquiry. Well, joining me to discuss all this is psychologist, author of We Who Wrestle with God, the co-founder of the Peterson Academy, my good friend Jordan Peterson. Jordan, great to have you back on Uncensored. You contacted me because you don't agree necessarily with my views of Tommy Robinson. I think we share a lot of views, probably even with him, about the rape gang scandal. There's much to discuss here. First of all, the rape gang scandal itself, with your expert psychologist eye, what has happened here to make so many people so afraid to call it out for what it was, which was predominantly British Pakistani Muslim men?
Why
abusing,
it has to be
raping,
Muslim? Why can't it be just
drugging
Pakistanis,
young,
man?
often underage,
Dirty
white
ass Pakistani
English
criminals. Not even the whole Pakistani community. Why it has
All right,
to be?
so let's think of.
You have to understand, this is based on racism, what they do right now.
Complexity that surround the issue. Okay, so the first is.
Oh, here we go with the fucking hands. Here we go with the hands.
Racial divide that typifies the crimes. So it's.
What's with the hands? What the fuck with these hands? What is he, Spider-Man? This is all performance. This is all performance. He doesn't have to go with these hands and this. Is he trying to hypnotize me? Close your eyes, everybody.
Pakistani Muslim immigrants and white working class young girls. So there's a racial, ethnic, and religious.
So you have to see the history of this thing. This has happened in the United States during the Jim Crow era. It's not beautiful. And during the October 7, when Israelis lied, the Jews lied, the Hamas raped and shot nails into women's vaginas. They raped all these women. It was all a lie because they want to portray this picture of this brown people having sex with these beautiful, luscious, sounds a little sexy, luscious white women. I had sex with white women all the time when I was in college, and I loved it. But it was consensual, by the way. But the whole idea is, see how he has his hand? What the fuck is he doing? A magic trick here? The whole idea is that this is the whole issue. They want to drive home the word Islam. Islam is evil, and beautiful white women, ivory, right? Who's Abby? Okay, I don't know. Abby and Ivory, the ivory-colored, beautiful white women who are being raped. Okay, there was a lot of shit going on by these neighborhood gangs, whatever you want to call them. They don't represent anything of religious value. They represented themselves as perverts or pedophiles. You want to call them whatever you call. I'm with you 100%. They should go to jail, whatever it is. But when you try to frame the idea that Islam is bad, Islamic, Pakistani Muslim, Muslim Pakistanis, Pakistani Muslims, this is where I find it to be wrong. And I find that the framework has not, they don't even care about the girls that were being molested, whatever it was, or were being raped or being groomed. The majority of these girls were young, but they were consensual sexual act with these kids because they were cool, because they were part of a gang, whatever. And they were underage. That's the whole idea. They were 13, 14 years old. Anyway, let's watch this musician do his lies. He's come here. This is a performance. Ben Shapiro said, oh, you got to go in there. Make sure you got to make those, vilify those Muslims. Huh? You got to do it. I'm going to give you a raise. Go ahead.
This divide that is part and parcel of the crime. And there's a class
Put
issue
your hands in your ass with
to
this
the victims and also the whistleblowers like Robinson. Then there's the meta problem of the difference between Islam and Christianity.
Well, here we go.
The additional problem that psychopathic sadists use religious justification to camouflage and justify their crimes.
Yes.
Then there's the problem of open borders and immigration and the progressive presumption that...
You see where they're going with it. Now, he has jumped from Islam versus Christianity. He jumped to the border. He's going to put everything together in a mix of stew and stew it together and make one, and going to boil one soup. Put them all together in one soup. These people are driven by racism and by hatred of other people. Crime is a crime. The Catholics banged so many kids. It's almost like the Holocaust in Germany. If we counted all the kids that were raped by the priests and molested, maybe 6-7 million. Millions of children were being raped for 100 years by the Catholic Church inside the churches itself by priests who are representative of God.
all cultures, no matter their difference, are valuable in their diversity and can be integrated peacefully into society at, what would you say, an indefinite rate. Okay, and then to add another level of complexity, there's the politicking between the progressives and the right wing with regards to all the issues I just described. Okay, so that's like an absolute bloody rat's nest. And there's lies in every one of those, along every one of those dimensions that are extraordinarily deep and pervasive. And so I was very apprehensive about this discussion with you, Piers, because there's almost no way of weaving, let's say, our way through this without making egregious errors.
Yeah.
So, okay, so well, let's, on the psychological side, let's point out two primary realities. The first is that sexual misbehavior even of the sadistic kind is to be expected. You might think about it as an aberration from the norm, but it's only an aberration when the norm is deep and profound and the consequence of many years of socialization and centuries of history. Like the default position for an unguarded woman worldwide and throughout history has been rape target. That's the norm, not the civilized conduct that generally obtains between men and women, even in public, like on the streets in the West. And then there's the additional issue that resentful, psychopathic, sadistic, low status, desperate men will use any excuse whatsoever to get access to women.
Yep.
So those are just some of the ugly realities that we have to contend with to weave our way through this complete bloody mess.
Yeah, and it is very complex. But at the heart of it, you also have a massive cover-up where people from local government, from the main federal government, police, social workers, almost everybody whose job it is to protect particularly vulnerable young girls in society. I mean, I can't think of a group you would more want to protect or throw the force of the establishment protective arm around than vulnerable young girls. At every level, they conspired to not just fail them, but they failed them in many cases deliberately because they didn't want to, in their eyes, let off a tinderbox, a racial tinderbox, by telling people, hey, you know what's happened here? A very large number of British Pakistani Muslim men have been systematically raping young, damaged white girls.
The whole Muslim will be the whole aim of this whole episode has to do with Islam and Muslim. They want to condemn 2 billion people. They want to talk about Islamic country. Do you know what happened to rapists in Islamic countries? Trust me, they don't live. Okay, thank you.
Damaged before they got their hands on them for a very, very long time, and we've done very little about it. And they didn't want to say this because they were terrified that there would be a huge scandal around that, and there would be a lack of, there would be unrest in communities and so on, which to me seems the ultimate in moral cowardice.
Well, okay, I think there's two things going on there, Piers. The first is the certainty that anyone who would blow the whistle would be subject to the worst possible of cancellations by the woke mob.
Whoa.
And this is partly why I have some sympathy for Tommy Robinson, let's say, because it is definitely the case that to take a stand against this is to make yourself a target for the worst sort of calumny and legal action. So that the threat is real. And the cancel culture types are very good at identifying individuals and bringing reputation savaging to bear on them in an extremely effective way. So people had reason to be afraid. Now, I'm not saying that that fear justifies their silence or their complicity, but we have to be clear about the fact that their fear is real.
Yeah.
Now, there's another...
So we hit the woke mob. See, there's woke, mass immigration, Islam versus Christianity. Let's go. Let's see what this doctor has to say.
Aspect to that that's even uglier than this, I think, Piers, which is that, look, we know that when you destabilize a community with rapid transformation, this would be, let's say, with regards to the green agenda that makes energy more expensive, or to uncontrolled immigration.
All right, he's hitting all the boxes, guys. Now he's up to green. Green energy is part of the problem that's called... What the fuck are you talking about? What are you talking about? Can we just stick to the Muslims and just hate on them for one? Why do you have to hate on everybody?
Rapid change with economic consequences demolishes the lower rungs of the socioeconomic hierarchy, most particularly, right? They say that when the aristocracy catches a cold, the working class die of pneumonia. And that's a deep biological and sociological truth. Yeah. Now, one of the corollaries of that, and this is where it gets ugly, is that it's very easy for the elite, especially in a relatively class-based system like the UK, to virtue signal about their progressive openness and their cosmopolitan sophistication well sacrificing the genuinely poor and dispossessed, so the English working class, to the depredations of whatever virtue signaling policy happens to be conveniently at hand. And so partly it's cowardice, partly it's fear of say, being singled out and canceled, but it's also partly willingness on the part of the elite to sacrifice the genuinely downtrodden and poor to their moral presumptions, to their costless virtue signaling. And that happens consistently throughout the West now. Almost all the progressive agenda, including the open immigration policies, are absolutely devastating to the people who can least afford to be devastated. So I would say the elite in Great Britain made a choice to sacrifice the children of working class Brits to the moral grandstanding of their progressive elitism. And that's in addition to the absolute cowardice that had some justification in real fear, because there was a cost. And I think that's why Robinson is such a complex figure, because you said in your introduction you're not very happy about his documentary, and I don't know what to make of that documentary, the one that, as you said, savaged the reputation of the Syrian immigrant. There's so many layers of lies surrounding absolutely everything that's part and parcel of this complete bloody catastrophe that it's very difficult to get to the truth.
Yeah,
so,
I mean,
one of the things that we can say is that...
Yeah, on Robinson, here's what I would say. I watched your interview with him. I've interviewed him myself. He's not he's not stupid. He's very articulate. He speaks in a very passionate manner. But the things I have a problem with Robinson about are this. One is, I don't think people in America, it seems to me, in the last week, since Elon Musk did a torch to all this, and in my opinion, probably did us a massive favor as a country, notwithstanding a lot of the things he said, I think, have been quite problematic in terms of the vitriol on certain individual members of parliament. For example, he targeted one female member of parliament, Jess Phillips, who then got immediate death threats. People are now being arrested in connection with those death threats. It is serious, because 2 members of parliament in Britain have been murdered in the last 10 years by people who didn't agree with their opinion. So I think there's a responsibility that Elon has, which he has to tread carefully about in how he says things about public officials. However, he's absolutely right to say that this is a scandal that hasn't gone away, that the cover-up has never been properly investigated, that people were never held properly accountable, that no one has gone to prison who was at any level of responsibility for trying to protect these girls. None of them were properly held to account. All of that, I think, is a valuable thing that Elon Musk has now made everyone think about properly. And the only answer to me is a full independent national inquiry to get to the bottom of all of it, and then to hold people properly accountable. My problem with Robinson being the so-called hero of this is that many people in America, and I'm not saying you're one of them, I'm sure you now know a lot more about him perhaps than you did before, but Robinson is not in prison right now for anything to do with the gang rape scandal. He's in prison because of this movie he made, this documentary, as he put it, as a journalist, which I don't think he is. He's someone who made a film after he was convicted in a court by a judge of being seriously defamatory to a young Syrian refugee boy who he tried to make out was the villain of a bullying incident that went viral because there was a clip, when in fact he was the victim. The judge made it crystal clear in his very extensive ruling, which I read at length last night. It's many, many pages. It's extremely detailed.
I know it's a little boring. We're going to get to that issue. Hold on.
What the school had told him, all the documentary evidence, everything. There's no doubt that the judge's conclusion is that the victim was the victim, that the boy who did the bullying in the video that went viral, Bailey, who was befriended by Tommy Robinson, that he was also a victim in many ways of the firestorm that erupted after this story went viral. He also made it clear that Bailey had not had a racial motivation that he could establish against a Syrian refugee, which had been the original narrative that went out there. So it was very educational, this judgment, in many ways. He came to the bottom of what had happened. But he also made clear that the 5 witnesses which Robinson brought to court to try and support his proposition that this Syrian refugee was the bad one of the 2, that all of their evidence was lacking in credibility. In fact, he called it, he said some of them clearly invented their testimony completely. And he was very scathing about the quality of the evidence of everyone that Robinson brought there. And in the end, he found Robinson guilty of defamation. He fined him £100,000 and I think £700,000 in legal costs. And he made it crystal clear to him, do not repeat these lies about this Syrian refugee boy, Jamal, again. And all that Robinson did was go away and repeat them to absolutely everyone, including in this film, to wide audiences. And they are ultimately lies, as proven in a very forensic and extensive court case held by a very eminent judge. So my problem with Robinson is that he's trying to portray himself as this great martyr who's been, had lawfare put against him by the British establishment to silence him, when in fact...
Tommy Robinson is working for the Zionists. If you remember, a couple of months ago, before the race riot that happened in England, that he activated all the hoodlums and all the idiots in the bars and all the stuff, the British population, every weekend, 1 million British people used to go and protest against the war in Gaza. Every weekend. So what they did is the Zionist propagandists paid Tommy Robinson money to activate his goons and bring them out, do a little showmanship, try to burn a hotel with people in them, which I don't think they were trying to do anyway, and try to create this race riots and these forgotten people. What happened is it worked. He divided the country. The protesters against Israel died because people were busy with themselves. Then they created us against them, and it worked. This is what he does. This is what he does. He's nothing but a hoe for the Zionist entity. That's all it is. And all this hocus pocus, this conversation today with Piers Morgan has nothing to do with the victims, has nothing to do with the rapes. It's nothing but to try to project that Muslims are evil and they are rapists. If these guys were rapists, they acted on their own. In 2022, 77% of all rape and sexual assault in Great Britain were done by white men. Now, could we say they were white Catholics or white Protestants? What do you want to say? It just says white. So why do we have to address the issue Pakistani Muslim? What does religion has to do with their criminality? Because if you look into the facts that religion and faith forbid you from doing such acts against women or sexual or even sex out there. If they were Muslims, they would not be raping people, or they would not be having consensual sex with women or grooming any young white beautiful women. I guess, this is all I did. They're white and they're Muslim. The two words that don't go together.
In fact, it was his refusal to be silenced and to repeat lies about this young Syrian refugee boy, which is why he's in prison. Secondly, my problem with him, Jordan, if I'm honest, is I don't know how many Americans or people in America who've been following this, because I see all the stuff on social media, they just don't seem to understand that Robinson's criminal record is highly extensive and very unpleasant. So, for 20 years, he's been breaking the law. He attacked an off-duty police officer. He led a hooligan group of football thugs in a brawl involving 100 people. He headbutted a man in Blackburn. He used a false passport to get around the fact he had criminal. He's a common criminal. To America and was caught. He perpetrated mortgage fraud, over £160,000. He was then found in contempt of court twice for turning up at court cases involving people who had been accused of committing these heinous crimes of grooming and raping these girls, nearly wrecking the trials because he was saying defamatory things in public outside the courtroom. And then we come to the refugee story, in which he's now back in prison again. And he was found guilty of stalking a journalist and accusing a partner of being a paedophile. This is not a nice guy. This is a pretty repellent human being who also simultaneously has been right to bang on for many years about...
So this whole shit about him, all his criminal record, is just to give Piers Morgan a little cover. In case people say, oh, Piers Morgan is defending a criminal. He said, Lord, listen, I said all this stuff about him on my show. I show all his crime history. So I really was not giving him any platform, but he was absolutely right when it had to do with those Muslims.
The scandal of the rape gangs. So, yes, he's complicated, but at the heart of it is somebody who I think also, just finally on the point of Robinson, 2 points I'd make. One, I think he's done this, he's monetized his hatred of Islam. It has warped, in my view, all his so-called journalism, activism, whatever he wants to call it, because it's always skewed against Muslims. It's never fair and balanced in any way. And I think that's what tipped him over the edge with the story of this boy at the school. And, on that, the bully, the alleged bully, was actually kicked out of the school before this ever got made public by the media. So they'd already had their own investigation, concluded he was guilty not just of that, but a litany of other similar offences. So he was thrown out. But I also think that Robinson, and this is a slightly more complicated and insidious thing about him, I think he's been deliberately amplified and promoted by the people who have most to lose from exposure, justified exposure, because if they can make Robinson the guy that is trying to expose them, he's so discredited, particularly in the UK, that people won't take it seriously. And that's one of the reasons why there hasn't been more action, is because the leading whistleblower is Tommy Robinson. So I see problems in all of this with him, but notwithstanding, as I said at the start, I do think he's been absolutely right that this has been a massive scandal, which has shamed the country, and that it needs proper national inquiry to get to the bottom of it. So that's where I sit with Robinson.
We agree.
Yeah, well, I've been following the rape gang scandal for, I would say, 15 years, but the primary source of information for me in Canada has been Tommy Robinson, and his insistence on pursuing this come what may was part of the reason that I looked into it. And I think that's probably the case for Elon Musk as well. And it's an open question how much of a monster you have to be to shrug off all the accusations and the reputation savaging and to put and the threats to your own existence and to your family's existence to sally forth regardless and bring these issues to public attention, over a decade, let's say. And, it might be wonderful for us to presume that the person who does that would also be of unimpeachable ethical character on all dimensions simultaneously. But we've seen the silence of people with unimpeachable characters in the face of this onslaught, and it doesn't bode well for them. So, and then the other thing I would say too, this isn't exactly in defense of Robinson.
Go with the hands. Go with the hands. Take it easy. Take it easy.
I'm trying to weave my way through this.
Please.
But there's another ugly issue here, Piers, that no one will grapple with, which is, you described Robinson as anti-Muslim, let's say. Well, we don't really understand the relationship between the religious doctrine, let's say, and the fact of these crimes. Now, I'm going to make you understand.
Islam is a carbon copy of Christianity. Adultery is wrong. Sexual assault is wrong. Rape is wrong. Incest is wrong. Everything that's in Christianity is in Islam. It's a carbon copy of Christianity. The only difference we have is the triune God. Everything else. So the difference, and you already had conversation with Muhammad Hijab, and you had a large Muslim following. The only reason you're shitting on the Muslim community right now with all those fucking hands you got on the fucking screen is because you lost the majority of them when you came out supporting Israel because of Gaza. They all left you and they all disconnected their subscriptions from your channel. Now you can shit on them all day. You know the difference. You're not a layman. You're a person of highly educated, and you should know the difference.
Two cases here. The first case is that
they go with the hands.
40 out of 50 Muslim majority countries in the world are authoritarian hellholes, and only 3 of them are democracies.
So I don't know what's the correlation between what happened to these victims 10 years ago and democracy in the Muslim world. Okay, let's see the difference between democracies, okay? I'm going to give you an example of Saudi Arabia and the United States. Sorry, I'm an American citizen. I love America. No guys are cutting off their penises. No children are being told they're girls or boys. There is no confusions. And there is no pushing this LB, you know what I'm talking about. Don't want to get canceled on YouTube because they got more power than they don't have that. So who's better in another way? Because the United States or the Western society is probably politically ahead, but socially backwards. You're going backwards. You're not going forward. You're going back to the time of Saddam and Gomorrah. I'll tell you like it is. Go ahead.
And that's Morocco, Indonesia, and Turkey. And, they're not, I wouldn't put them in the highest echelons of stellar states. And so why is that exactly? Is that a deviation from Islamic principles, or is it a consequence of them? Now, no one wants to have that discussion, and there's no bloody wonder.
You're talking about. What democracy has to do with
that's
Islam?
On the negative side, let's say. And there are certainly doctrines in Islam that are very, very difficult to square with free, liberal, Western, Christian democracies. And those differences aren't just apparent, they're deep. Now, I would say on the optimistic side that we could turn to Islamic leaders like those who run the United Arab Emirates, and even to some degree now Saudi Arabia, and the signatories of the Abraham Accords to find
the Abraham Accords. You see what he's touched? This has nothing to do with the rape victims in England. All the guests here, he has touched on the Green Deal, on the open border, on Islam versus Christianity, and now the Abrahamic Accord. These countries who made peace with Israel, the Zionist entity that I work for, are good countries. You see how good they are?
A different pathway. There have been stellar leaders, both from Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who've come out and said that publicly, very publicly, that they've got their Islamic fundamentalists under control and firmly in hand, and are completely.
The problem is that Islamic fundamentalists don't like people who rape. They kill them. What the fuck does it have to do with them? What does it have to do with Islam or Islamic fundamentalism? Anybody who's accused of a sex crime is executed, okay, or hanged in these countries. So what's the point here you're trying to make, my friend? I don't understand. I'm not defending these countries. I don't give a damn about them. What I'm trying to make the idea is that this garbage here, doctor, whatever his name is, this Canadian douchebag here, who has a good relationship with his daughter, suspectful, is telling us that because Islamic countries are not democratic like Western liberal societies, then, I don't know, then they are more corruptible of being rapists. I guess that's what he's trying, which is the opposite. You're going to lose your life if you try to attack a Muslim woman in any Islamic country. There's rape, of course there are, but they get punished when they get caught. But the whole correlation that Islamic fundamentalism, I'm going to use my hands like he does, is the problem. What has to do with these Pakistani, British-born Pakistanis? They're not even born in Pakistan. They are the product of a British society, liberal democracy.
Diluted as to their danger, but Europeans are virtue signaling so hard on the progressive side that the fundamental danger from Islamic fundamentalism is going to come from Europe and the UK and not from the Arab states. Now, Tommy Robinson has been pilloried as anti-Islam, but there's a discussion to be had here. And no one wants to have it. And, you know, you said we need a national inquiry. It's like, we need more than a national inquiry. We need something like an international symposium on the relationship between the Christian West and the Islamic world, because there are ugly things afoot, and they've manifested themselves in the most hideous of all possible ways in the UK with regards to these rape crimes and the cover-up. But there's something that needs to be sorted.
In 2018, in the United States of America, the beacon of liberal democracy, 728,000 women were, according to the FBI here, 734,000 women and 600, they say people were raped, including threat, attempt, or completed rape. That means they assaulted them or tried to rape them. That's what liberal democracy has offered. Almost the population of Qatar or Kuwait, one of these countries he's talking about, were actually in 2018 were raped, or there was an attempt rape on them in the United States of America. So there is a problem with these experts. When you see that kind of number, I dare you to come up with a number like that in any Islamic country or Muslim country or democratic or authoritarian or monarchy, whatever you want to call them. Such numbers will not exist. That's like a Holocaust if that happened in their countries. Right.
Sorted out at the bottom of all this. And one of those is, like, you talk about moderate Muslims. Like, I looked up
the Muslims.
The polling data today that Winston Marshall, for example, referred to when he interviewed Nigel Farage. And, you know, it's about 3/4 of UK Muslims would be perfectly content if Sharia law happened to be the, what would you say, the principle of the day for the UK as a whole. And
example, if I was to go ask evangelists in the United States, would you like America to become a Christian country under Christian law? Yes. Yes, right away. Of course, Jesus. They're going to start singing, of course. It doesn't make it so. If these people say they express their wishes, doesn't make that British 1,000-year or 800,000 or 1,000-year, I think, monarchy Christian country is going to become a Sharia-based law country. Okay.
And that it would be fine if Islam became the national religion.
See, it's all racism. This show is all racism,
so,
man.
You know, a cynic would say, okay, just exactly where the hell are these moderates? And at minimum, their voice needs to be amplified. And then we could also point out that the participation in these rapes by members of the Pakistani Muslim community, it was like 1 in 7 of the men in some of these communities was directly involved. And that meant everyone knew about it. Absolutely everyone on the Pakistani Muslim side. And the moderates were certainly, you know, silent and complicit. Now, obviously, so were the authorities. And so that's a complete bloody catastrophe for everyone involved. But there's a serious conversation.
Notice when he's using the word bloody, 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 he's trying to make a connection with Piers Morgan, because most of British use the word, that's a bloody, crazy, bloody thing to say. So you got to understand, these are all actors. These are all actors. I swear to God, these are all, our politicians are actors. our experts are actors, all our media people are actors, all our influencers are actors. Everybody's acting, and they have a certain view of the world where they want to. It's all about money at the end of the day. So he's using the word bloody, 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 bloody. He's from Canada. They don't use that word. We don't use that word in the United States.
You had in the West, and particularly in the UK, maybe France and Germany in secondary place, about just exactly how it is that liberal Western democracies, with their emphasis on the rights of women, can live side by side with Islam in general, especially the sort of Islam that's transformed into enabling fundamentalism that allows this sort of criminality on the part of the psychopathic, resentful
This is the problem I have with this motherfucker. What's wrong with you? What Islam has to do with rape? These are not Catholic priests, okay? It has nothing to do with that. He keeps on trying to make a correlation between rape and the religion. The religion is against rape and against pedophilia. As a matter of fact, Muslims have more value, family values, than the average Western family. We're against all this fucking hocus pocus you guys going on. You're going backwards.
Psychopathic sadists.
So
no one wants to have that conversation.
Well, listen, I think any conversation is worth having, no question. I would point out that one of the most heinous gang rape stories of modern times.
Thank you.
Just got exposed in France.
And all white.
With that poor woman whose husband was drugging and having a rape bite. Now, what was fascinating about that, from a social point of view, was just the sheer range of predominantly white local men from all walks of life who thought it was perfectly okay to go and rape a drugged woman in her bed and be videoed doing so. And I found that utterly heinous and reprehensible. So it's not just like this is a problem which is only in the Pakistani British Muslim community. It's not. Having said that, this is clearly...
Definitely.
Okay, hold on.
But the other point I would make...
The thing that happened in France where a Christian French husband was drugging his wife and having hundreds of men rape her while she was drugged, is that connected to Christian fundamentalism? Is it? Are these white people are unable to assimilate and behave themselves and become decent human beings? That a man will actually drug his wife and videotape while men come in all day raping her while she's drugged? You see how you got to make it, you have to make it make sense. It has criminality has nothing to do with religion. I'd rather have a Christian family and a Jewish family who are religious next to me as neighbors than a secular family. Because I know as a Christian people who will go to church, I will feel safe in that neighborhood. My children, I'll feel they'll be safe. You understand? So religion could play a positive part in society. If religion was able to function normally, it can play a great part and positive part in society. But in Western societies and democracies, they stifle religion. They declare war on religion. They corrupt religion. They pervert religion in order to what? To make it less credible. The same thing this so-called Dr. Douchebag is doing about Islam right now. It was Islamic fundamentalism is given the idea for mass rape. What does it have to do with that, man? I will speak my mind. I think you're full of shit, you and your ancestors. Excuse me, I'm the ancestors. That's not my business. Good. There we go.
The other point I make on is what I was going to make on a wider point is that there are roughly, I think, about the same number of Muslims in the UK and the US. We have disproportionately higher than the US in terms of the size of our population. I think it's about 5-6 million in both, something around there. And it's still true that the vast majority of Muslims in both the UK and the US are not extremists.
Thank you.
Lead their lives completely peacefully.
Nope.
The UK has always come out pretty much on top of all the surveys of tolerance and diversity and a good, safe, pretty good place to live. We had a big problem with ISIS extremists a few years ago, but we managed to tackle that. And thanks to Donald Trump and others in America, ISIS, until recently, has been kept very firmly back in its box and not been able to commit the same outrages. But I certainly didn't get a sense that all the Muslims in Britain were racing to be part of ISIS. They weren't. The extremists, as they are in every religion, are the exception, not the norm. And it's a pretty perilous road we go down if we start to say, well, the whole Muslim community is at fault here, which, by the way, Tommy Robinson has said, after the 7/7 bombings.
He's doing it right now. He's doing it right now.
The underground system here, a heinous series of 4 terror attacks in London. Tommy Robinson went up and basically accused all Muslims of being complicit, all of them.
and later retracted it. But that's why when I say Tommy Robinson is an Islamophobe, I don't think he doesn't hide it. He might deny it, but he doesn't hide it from his own rhetoric. He is somebody that despises Islam and believes that all Muslims were to blame when there were terrorist attacks by extremists in London. And I think that is dangerous rhetoric. So I think that there is a conversation.
Well, it's clearly dangerous. It's clearly dangerous.
The conversation has to be nuanced.
Okay,
and it has to be careful. Would you accept that?
I agree. Well, let's take absolutely. That's for sure. I mean,
you see how he has his hand all covered? That's a protective move. You understand? They say that a psychologist, the way he is all covered, he's trying to protect himself. He has to lie. His whole objective to come here was to please Ben Shapiro. That's all it was.
Let's take it apart a little bit more then. I mean, first of all, there are reasons that the authorities were afraid to act in a manner that they should.
Walk.
Now, they were afraid partly because they would be pilloried by their confreres on the radical left, because the progressives are very good at reputation savaging their own.
Yeah.
But they're also afraid of a Islamic fundamentalist backlash and the murderousness that might accompany that.
No.
So there's a reason they're afraid. And Piers, you also didn't address my issue. And I'm
what the fuck you say? Yeah. What does Islamic fundamentalism has to do with rape? Do you think they want to be associated with that? What the fuck are you guys talking about? This is shameful. Imagine if you talk about Jews like that. There are 10,000 pedophiles in Israel right now, according to the Jerusalem Post. Why don't we talk about that? What does this has to do with Islam? You know, the reason I'm not, I'm kind of religious, but not religious. You know, I'm culturally Muslim. I pray and all that stuff, and I believe in doing good and donating to the poor. I do that all the time, but I find it scary when you have two people discussing mass rape of white women in Britain and trying to, I'm using my hands like he does, trying to correlate it with Islam, Islamic fundamentalism, I'm going to do him, and rape. Islamic fundamentalism and rape. It has nothing to do with that, man. This fucking, this segment of Piers Morgan is so anti-Islamic. It's unbelievable. It's like a hate show.
I'm not accusing you of anything. I don't expect you to have the answers because this is too complex. But you know, the fact that only 3 of 50 Muslim majority polities in the world, states, are democratic, even approximating democratic. It's like, what the hell are we democratic exactly? Like, look, first of all, you pointed to the fact that there are psychopathic sadists, dark tetrad types, right? Machiavellian, narcissistic, psychopathic, and sadistic. That's the constellation of personality traits. And that's a human constant. It's about 3 to 5% of the population. And that's independent of race and ethnicity. So like, there's no shortage of bad actors. And you're right to point to that rape case in France. There were 75,000 people in the chat groups associated with that rape case, fantasizing about doing exactly the same sort of thing to their wives or to someone else's wife. There's no bottom to the darkness of the human soul. And the bloody progressives.
Well, those are Christians, right? Why don't you say they were Christians?
Now, so you can't point to the Muslims, let's say, and say, well, that's where all the psychopaths are, because clearly that's not the case. But
you've just been doing it for the last half an hour. You've been saying the same thing.
It's still open. It still allows this other can of worms to remain uninvestigated.
Which is, worms.
So 100% of Protestant or Catholic majority countries outside of Africa are highly functional democracies. 100%. 6% of Muslim majority countries are democracies, and they're not in the highly functional category.
I don't know if you've been to the Middle East. You could eat off the floor. You go to Kuwait, you go to the UAE. These are fucking like cities in the 22nd century. And I don't know. I mean, I think this democracy is kind of a bit overrated here, my friend. If we're discussing sexual behavior and sexuality in liberal democracies, we don't want that in in Islamic country. Nobody wants that. You can keep that for yourself. If that's what makes you ahead of the people and that makes you more, high class, whatever you want, what the word is, that's good for you. You can have all that stuff for you, okay?
Do they want to be democracies? Do they actually want to be democracies? I mean, we have a slightly quaint view in places like the UK that we are the exemplar for how a country should operate. When I was in Qatar, for example, for the World Cup, the Football World Cup, I met some of the high-ranking Qataris, including people who were related to the Emir, and they were kind of laughing at the idea that they would look at the UK as a template for how a society should exist with our knife crime, our drug abuse,
yeah, well,
our
it's easy to say that.
I'm throwing it back at you. That They were genuinely bemused.
apart.
They were genuinely bemused that we would think here that somehow the way our country operates is the exemplar that they should be adopting.
Okay, well, so this is what I would say to that is, first of all, you're right, but that
rough.
Let's skip this shit. This is fucking overrated, man. You gotta go to sleep.
And he's definitely a person like that. Everything he does. The Liberals had the party, and I get green mob because.
Here we go. Let's go to the panels. Probably more exciting.
Appreciate that for a long period of time. We showed a clip there from 2011 on Newsnight where Robinson was very passionate about this issue of the rape gang scandal. That this has been somebody who's been trying to persuade people to take it more seriously for a long time.
Absolutely. And I think the reason why he connects with this so much is because he's from those communities. I wrote a sort of a small piece about, imagine if this was in Lahore in Pakistan and you had men from South Shields and Leeds, you know, raping Pakistani women with impunity. I mean, that's the kind of sentiment it would draw. That being said, I think it's very clear that a lot of sort of his anti-Islam sentiments did color this. So there was a GLC SC academic report that was released in 2020, which actually found that it was the Pakistani cultural heritage of these men that were more tied to these rapes than their Muslim heritage, because they did a sort of a focus group comparing them to Bangladeshi men, who are almost exclusively Muslim as well. And they found that Bangladeshi men were either underrepresented or not represented at all in these mass rapes. So it was actually a cultural problem. And you can see it when you look at the rape of sort of, the situation with rape in Pakistan, for example. So 72%, up to 72% of women in custody in Pakistan are either sexually or physically abused by police officers. The penalty for rape in Pakistan is life imprisonment or hanging, because it's such a serious problem. So these sort of, it's almost like the perfect storm, having these predominantly male tight-knit communities coming from a place like Pakistan that has that cultural issue already, being in the UK, basically acting with impunity with regards to this, and having such close family ties as well. I mean, you know, I know this is uncomfortable. Pakistan is one of the most inbred countries in the world, and so you have these people that have close family ties that often.
The whole royal family in England is inbred. Shut the fuck up. The monarchy, the old inbred. Don't you see how they look?
Cousins or second cousins or all of that in these communities that are acting basically with each other. That's why in places like Rochdale, 1 in 7 of these predators were Pakistani men, and they basically all knew each other. It was that condensed.
Yeah, it was.
And so I'm glad for Tommy Robinson, you know, raising this issue. However, we have to look at the facts and what a lot of this is suggesting. This wasn't Indian men, for example, of Indian heritage, Hindu.
No, it was a very specific. Yeah, look,
it was very specific.
Very specific to British, Pakistani Muslim men in the north of England. I mean, Ava, it's a you know, I've sort of wrestled with this because without Elon Musk amplifying Tommy Robinson in the last week, would we be having this big renewed debate about the whole scandal, which many feel, including me, having studied it all afresh again, does seem very unfinished business. In other words, there is no accountability. No one ever went to prison for the cover-up. There are still many of the people who perpetrated this who've never been brought to justice.
The council
many
workers.
Who were supposed to have been deported have not been deported, etc., etc. There are many, many more victims likely out there. I mean, would we be having this debate right now if Elon hadn't poked his big nose in with his very powerful amplifier of his own platform and been invoking Tommy Robinson, who happens to be in prison for something else, but has been banging his drum?
Well, I mean, it wasn't Elon Musk or Tommy Robinson who reignited the debate in the last couple of weeks. That was actually done by a journalist, although that's underreported on X at the moment. I think, though. Yeah,
but that's the point, though. It was underreported generally.
Sure, but
so my point is that it took the big clunky club of Elon Musk, the most followed person on his own platform in the world.
This is a kiss-ass moment. The biggest follower, the clunky club. Why don't you just go suck his dick and come back, Piers? That's it. It's a dick-sucking moment for the people.
To go boom, 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 and cause outrage and mayhem and offend loads of people and be very abusive about Keir Starmer and Jess Phillips and Gordon Brown and others. But did it take that to shake us out of our complacency about the scale of what has gone on here?
But I don't think it's us, and I don't think that the public are complacent. I think that successive governments have been complacent. And actually, I think that this has shown up the Labour Party's cowardice, because Why on earth did it take this long for them to decide that actually they would like to implement some of the recommendations, if not all of the recommendations,
I
of the
agree,
report
yeah.
that was released 2 years ago? One thing I found really shocking, it was an entire week. It wasn't until Sunday at 1 p.m. did a press release arrive in my email inbox, which was from the Labour Party, that said, actually, we are going to implement these recommendations. It showed the cowardice of them, because why on earth?
Why hadn't the Tories implemented any of them?
No, but see, this is what I don't like. I don't like this whataboutery, because one thing is what.
Well, because surely, Valley, you mentioned
which
governments.
I don't think you're making, but I do think the Labour Party are making. And I think Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting, the point that they've tried to make is, well, they didn't implement this over the last 14 years or so. And you say, okay, but great leaders don't spend their time blaming other people for errors, that, you know, for things that they could actually fix in their power. If Wes Streeting or Keir Starmer really, truly believed that this was the most important issue of the day, when they came into government, they would have said, hey, where's that report? Where's Professor Jay's report? Let's start implementing these recommendations now.
Yes, I agree. Now, Jack, you've been very immersed in this subject. You went on Joe Rogan. You were personally abused by Tommy Robinson after that. You've also been very scathing about Jordan Peterson. You believe he's been platforming him regularly, getting millions of views, which he has, undeniably, and that he's been effectively enhancing Robinson's reputation in the process. And you said the impact of his cheerleading shouldn't be understated. He certainly cut a slightly different tone, I think, with me earlier than he has in his interviews with Robinson. And I kind of get where he's coming from to a degree. Did you change any of your view about Jordan's role in this, having heard him tonight, or not?
I think not. I think he's not prepared to say anything negative about Tommy Robinson. I think that's very telling.
Well, he was almost saying it's not relevant to the whistleblowing about the rape gang scandal. I kind of get that argument, is that you can have a view about the reason he's in prison, which has nothing to do with that. You can have a view about his criminal past, being a football hooligan, beating up a policeman, mortgage fraud, passport stuff, all that stuff. You can have all these views about him, but you can also perhaps separate that from his relentless campaigning about what has turned out to be a scandal on the scale he kept saying it was.
But Jordan's not prepared to tackle Tommy's Islamophobia. It's not that he's done things in the past that are bad and they're unconnected to his anti-Islamic agenda. The reason Tommy was upset with me and started this little hate campaign of his against me was because I just quoted what he was saying on Twitter. I'll give the quote again because I paraphrased it last time. To be crystal clear, Tommy Robinson wrote at the end of last year, Palestine is a shithole full of inbred Islamist parasites and terrorists. Now, everyone who hears those words knows they're wrong. Tommy himself went back after I said this and just doubled down, said it's true. It's full of terrorists and parasites.
He got some new teeth. His veneers too big.
Now, Jordan's responsible for this mess that's going on now. And I don't say that lightly because I've spoken to Jordan for hours. And in terms of philosophy of religion, we get along well. We have good conversations. But I think he should be ashamed of himself because in the UK, we know who Tommy Robinson is. In the US, he has been Tommy Robinson's passport to gaining influence with Elon Musk, gaining influence with all of Peterson's followers. Last year, Peterson's videos online, they amassed over 9 million views on his output on Tommy Robinson. 3 hours of conversation. None of that dangerous rhetoric comes up at all. This is a former Harvard researcher. This is someone who worked at the University of Toronto. This is someone who claims to have had a keen interest in Tommy Robinson for years. Why was no question asked about that?
So let me ask you a difficult question. I hear what you say. And I watched the interviews, and they were certainly, he didn't go into all that background stuff. Is there an argument, though, that if you're Jordan Peterson and you feel, as Elon Musk clearly does, genuinely incensed by the scale of the scandal over here, and you know that notwithstanding all this stuff, that you believe the bigger picture is what Robinson has been saying about the scandal, and you know he comes from Luton, where a lot of this stuff was also happening and so on. Is there a valid argument to say, actually, you can divorce the two things? The rest of it is part of the legacy of Tommy Robinson, and it's why I have a big problem with him, and why Nigel Farage won't even deal with him, which should say a lot, I think, to people in America. But that actually, on this one issue, he has been relentless, like a dog with a bone, very passionate, pretty well informed, it turned out. If you listen to the whole interview with Paxman back in 2011, almost everything he said has been borne out by events. Should we have listened more to what he said about the scandal and been less dismissive, as I've been certainly guilty of him just as a person?
I think there's something to be said about it. I think, in short, that Tommy has shed light on it. And there's no doubt about that. But I think it's interesting to look at what him and Jordan Peterson aren't interested in shedding light on. They're only interested in sexual violence when it comes to Muslims against non-Muslims. But they're quite happy to stand on a stage next to Russell Brand and the like. There's no, it's very much criticize them, but not the other. Who's on my team? Who plays into my anti-immigration rhetoric? I think that tells us a lot about what they really
Russell
care
Brand
about.
has been accused of things, but he hasn't been convicted of any crimes.
Well, Elon Musk was pictured with Ghislaine Maxwell. That's a photo that's very easy to find.
Me
if you
too.
go and
I was
personally
pictured with
Google.
Ghislaine Maxwell. I met her for 5 minutes at a book launch in 2012 or something, and that picture gets sent to me 20 times a day as evidence that I was part of Epstein's Island gang. I've never met him, met her for 5 minutes. There's a picture of me and her at a book launch where everyone else got cut out. So these things, when you're a public figure of any kind, and obviously Musk is right up there, you're going to meet loads of people and get pictures with them. Doesn't mean your party or anything they're doing.
Can I add on to the back of what you had to say just then about so what Jordan Peterson was talking about there? He was talking a lot about the Muslim faith, and he was talking about how this is an Islam versus Christianity debate. I mean, in the UK,
Is he right about that?
Well,
should we have a grown-up debate about the impact of so many
compatibility.
people
Well,
coming
that
in?
Islam against Christianity? Are we going backwards to the fucking Crusades or what? Piers, you're going backward, Piers. You're fucking your shit up here.
A different view of perhaps democracy and those things.
well, what I was going to argue was today the Archbishop of Canterbury steps down,
Yeah.
and he's
There you go.
stepping down because he failed to report
Boom,
child
boom, boom.
Abuse in the church.
Yes,
Catholics
I
are
agree.
banging
I'm
those
a
kids.
Catholic.
Wish
I
I'd
have
made
to-
that point to Jordan.
And, well, I'm a Catholic, and I have to say the
So am I.
Vatican is not clear of this crime in any sense of the word. The Vatican
Agreed.
is plagued by this crime. Those are white Christian or Catholic
Yes.
people. I don't quite. I think it's so unhelpful for us to say that child grooming is exclusive.
But also that
to-
story in France is very relevant because
Yes. Well, yeah.
they were not all Muslim men
There
doing
were
it from
none
a
of them
cultural,
were.
religious point of view. I mean, the terrifying
Let her
thing
talk, man.
about that story
Talking
was
over
just
her.
the
You don't like her.
randomness of who these guys were.
Yeah.
They were highly paid professionals. They were local farmers. They were young, old,
Plumbers.
black, white. I mean, they were everything and anything, right? And they were all joined in this horrendous thing.
brotherhood of
Yeah.
sexual sadism. I think the most potent point that Jordan made was kind of condensing sort of human nature in the sense that a single woman, like a woman just being there by herself, is primarily viewed in nature as a target for rape, and she kind of almost speaks to the most evil and base male human instincts, and I think that's cross-cultural. That transcends religion or anything like that. I think the reason why this is such a tricky debate is because religions don't exist in and of themselves uniquely. Like religions also develop alongside cultures, for example. So the reason why, again, you see no representation of Bangladeshi British people in these rape scandals, but you see it's almost predominantly Pakistani
This is
men. And I
ethnically.
use the word Pakistani and Bangladeshi instead of Muslim because they're both basically Muslim,
Yeah.
right? It's because of the culture, and it's like a.
But that's
perfect
why
storm.
I don't like
but
the
these are the
generalized talk
conversations
about
we need to
Muslims.
have.
Like we're talking-
You just been doing it for a whole hour. You've been generalizing you and that fucking scumbag Jordan Peterson. He even said, well, they're not even democracies. Democracy, they're 40 years. Who the fuck gives about democracy, man? What does it have to do with rape? What does the 734,000 women in America were raped or attempted rape in 2018. That's 5 years ago. So do we blame that on Christian value or democratic values or liberal values or secular value? Who do we blame that on? You can't blame it on. You got to blame it on these people who are just criminals. It's very simple. If you're a criminal, you're a criminal. We should not attach your religion or your faith to your crime. Most serial killers are white. I'm sure they're Christians. Is that Christian fundamentalism that has to do with these white serial killers? Does that make any sense to you? This whole show today with Piers Morgan has nothing to do with the rape. They don't even care about those girls. The whole idea is to stigmatize Islam, to attach it to this rapist, Pakistani guys or gangs, whatever the fuck they are, and I really put them in jail. Some of them, put them all in jail. That's it. You have a legal system. Britain is not some fucking backward country. Most of the world's common laws come from Britain.
Robinson says after 7/7, this is my message: all Muslims are complicit.
Well,
that's an Islam.
But there are countries. There are countries with Muslims that have different cultures to other countries with different Muslims. I mean, the Muslims I grew up in West Africa, for example, are fundamentally different.
I can tell you, I've traveled to many Muslim countries. There's a lot of good in Muslim countries, and there's some bad, as there is in a lot of our Western European
Hindu,
countries,
all over the world.
You know, and when I hear them talk about us, trust me, it's not a compliment.
Well, I mean, don't the Qataris mock us for like putting our parents in care homes when
all
we care
of it.
more about our dogs than our families?
They mock
I mean,
us
like,
for pretty much all of it. Let me bring in Natalie, who's been waiting very patiently over in.
This is our Jewish friend. She's going to come here. She's going to become a Muslim scholar, a scholar on Islam, and she's going to call Muslim pedophiles. She's going to go even worse than these guys. And the problem I have with her when she says that, I already sold her segment, a little bit of it. Piers Morgan does not correct her. Oh, hold her.
In Washington. Natalie, a lot of Americans seem to have a very sort of simplistic view of this, which is British multiculturalism is to blame. That's why this has happened. I would argue, having lived here all my life, on and off, that multiculturalism has been very successful largely in the UK. We're known as a very tolerant and multicultural country with actually not many problems like this. This is a scandal involving a group of people from a very particular demographic of Muslims, specifically British Pakistani Muslims. And in the same way that separately we had a scandal of extremists attaching themselves to ISIS and committing acts of terror for a few years, and that got resolved, this has been dealt with not adequately, but will now, I'm sure, be dealt with adequately. Why should we blame multiculturalism in totality for this?
Here we go, watch.
Sure, well, I don't really think that tolerance should be the paramount virtue if the disparate cultures that you're importing into said country are cultures that, frankly, I think are conducive to gang.
Those cultures have been there for 100 years. The Pakistanis did not just jump right into it. They were former colonial countries who were part of the British Empire, where the British were raping probably Indian and Pakistani women for centuries, who happen to be second, third, and fourth generation. As a matter of fact, these Pakistanis should be attached to Western values because they were born in Britain, raised in Britain, and with British values.
Raping of young girls. If you read the Quran, I mean, young women, pedophilia isn't something that's totally out of the blue.
Quran is, see, this is the problem. When you have some fucking hoe come on fucking your show and starts to despise your whole faith about pedophilia, and we don't have nothing in the Quran about pedophilia. If I read the Bible, God used to take a third of the virgins. Remember? In the Old Testament. The New Testament was a little bit clean, but the Old Testament was all rape. Even God got shares of the virgins.
It's codified in that text. And I think why it resonates so strongly in America, and I know your analysis of it was maybe a little bit reductive, but it's because that's the lived experience of a lot of Americans when it comes to the issue of immigration. And I think the hypocrisy where you see elites pushing multiculturalism, pushing open borders, mass migration, when they've never really made the case as to why the average American benefits from it or needs to have it. They just say diversity is our strength, and that's where they end the sentence. And I think to that point, right, when you read the limited inquiries that they've had into the whole grooming gang escapades, what do they always say? Oh, well, the police didn't go into it because they didn't want to start race riots or race wars. I'm sorry. These are the same elites who have absolutely no qualms or no issue with bringing up, racialized incidents if it's a white person being the aggressor against a minority, just like what happened in the case of George Floyd. Yeah. So it's very selective, and I think it confirms what a lot of people think here, certainly in the United States with the agenda agenda of certainly mass illegal, and I think we've also learned this week, legal immigration, that there is some level of replacement, I think, of American culture going on here. And they do it by importing cultures that have nothing in common with the West. And our leaders will say that assimilation is racist, it's neo-colonial, it's not appropriate to say that cultures that have different values and standards than us need to adopt the shared cultures of the country that they're immigrating to. So that is not
isn't it also
a
true?
approach to
Isn't it
immigration
also
that works.
okay? But isn't it undeniably true that I think the vast majority of domestic terrorism in the United States this century has been perpetrated by white people?
Yeah, that's what the FBI said.
Well, that's only because they've reworked the definition of domestic terrorism to
Here we
include
go.
events like January 6th and people who are affiliated with MAGA. So I would certainly say that their classification of what constitutes domestic terrorism is sort of cherry-picked, especially when they prosecuted or persecuted every single Jan 6er on an individual basis. But I mean, the Biden regime just 3 weeks ago puts out a whole white paper, a new strategy to counter Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hate. I don't really think that that's the most pressing issue going on in the United States of America right now. And I think there's two compounding issues, which is what Dr. Jordan Peterson was getting into. One is the issue of mass migration at an unprecedented number in terms of the people who are coming in. Traditionally, America would sort of have on and off periods. Now you're seeing numbers of migrants that are just completely overwhelming what it used to be. And there's no off periods. And you have a sort of societal superstructure and culture where you look down on assimilation. And if you tell people who come from different cultures, and oftentimes it's racial.
700,000 women were raped in the United States by American citizens. Now, the whole issue has nothing, I agree, we should not have any open borders, all that, but don't blame this shit on other people. If 734,000 women were raped in 1918, what the fuck am I saying 1918? In 2018, that means what are we going to do with our citizens? So let's be factual. Now, the whole conversation was about Muslim, Pakistanis, now has turned to Mexicans. I don't know where we're going to go in the end, by the end of the show going.
Or there's a religious component to it, if they're not white or if they're Muslim or whatever they may be, that if you demand assimilation, you're smeared and mocked as a racist. And it doesn't work, because these cultures, as evidence in what's going on all around United Kingdom, and there's similar stuff going on here. We have no-go zones in the United States too. It doesn't work. And Piers, frankly, I don't think you're correct to say that multiculturalism has been successful. I think if you told the girls who were victims of violent, atrocious rapes, I don't think that they would agree that multiculturalism has been wonderful. I don't think.
Well, I would throw back to you. Look, I would throw back to you this argument, which is that I got into a lot of hot water in America many years ago over calling for gun control after the Sandy Hook mass shooting, for example. The vast majority of mass shootings in America are by disturbed young white men. Should we use that as a reason to take dramatic action against all young white men? I mean, that's the analogy I would use. Or do you accept that actually?
I don't think.
Well, my point is, do you accept that they're outliers to the norm? That they are extremists?
Giving our way out.
These kids committing the mass shootings.
Well, when 1 in 73 Pakistani men in that one town are engaged, I don't really even think that they're an anomaly or on the extremities. That is the mainstream culture, and it's certainly the mainstream culture. To be clear, level for police officers,
but to be clear,
covering it up.
To be clear, they were all almost exclusively members of the British Pakistani Muslim community. So that is a small number of the general Muslim population. Very small, actually.
Yeah,
and so it's not pertinent to say it was a Muslim cultural problem scandal. It was a cultural problem amongst British Pakistani men, exclusively.
I don't necessarily know if that framing is correct.
It is correct.
There's a racial element to it.
It is
well,
correct.
I think if you want to have the uncomfortable conversation about Islam, it is sort of conducive to pedophilia. I mean, I don't necessarily
what the fuck
think
you talking?
that you
what
can
pedophilia, bitch? What are you talking
the
about?
idea that, oh, well, just because they happen to be, Pakistani, British men.
Answer it again about the white school shooters.
Where I read
answer that question.
It's nice to have a conspiracy theorist on the line. It's always good fun. I hate to pull rank at you and sound like a twat, but
not a
both of my PhDs
theory,
are in philosophy of religion, and I think I'm slightly more qualified to speak about the Quran than you are, and to suggest even for a moment
Thank you.
that that document
Shut
allows for,
your bitch.
what it does is condemn
Thank you.
non-consensual marriage and non-consensual sexual contact. Like,
Well, I'd look up the rates of child brides then, and I'd see
the
what
real
countries
risk you
they're
have in
most
the US
prevalent in.
isn't multiculturalism. It's a multi-billionaire running the biggest social media planet, one of the biggest in the world, which has turned into an echo chamber of your ridiculous ideology. And the fact that you're telling us all and telling the British
out of our ass. Fuck you,
we're
Piers.
proudly multicultural, and as someone that was brought up in multicultural working class Birmingham, I can tell you for sure that there's not you won't find a Muslim there who's read the Quran and went, oh, you know what, it didn't rule out sexual violence, so I might just crack on with that. I don't know what planet you're living on or what you're smoking, but I'd suggest that you do a course in religious studies before you start chatting.
Well, thank you for the ad hominem attacks. I'm
It's
sure
not
that gives you
hominem.
a
He's
really
telling you
strong
you're
argument, but I
stupid. You're
think the young working
stupid.
class girls who probably grew up in the same areas that you did would beg to differ. I don't understand what you're saying. I've read the Quran. I've seen what's in there. Even if you don't think that my interpretation of the Quran is correct.
Challenger, can we have what verse? What the fuck is the verse? Can you give us a verse on pedophilia in the Quran?
I would point you to, I don't know, what countries have the most issues when it comes to child brides and raping of young girls and children. It's obviously a systemic cultural problem with Islam. It's not a problem that is contained or unique to the West. And I don't know, last time I checked, this whole grooming gang phenomenon is what contained primarily to Muslim men. And it really only started when you started seeing mass migration waves.
I just think this is so dangerous. This is so dangerous what you're saying. I mean, okay, so in the United Kingdom, 1 in 3 school children.
I think it's dangerous to be importing men from cultures who are willing to rape young women.
So 1 in 3 school children are sexually harassed on the way to school when they're in their school uniform. That is not done by, to use your language, by just Muslim men in the United Kingdom. That is done by all men. That is an institutional misogyny problem. And I think we're doing the victims of sexual harassment, sexual assault and rape a disservice by continuously just talking about Muslims as a monolith, as if they're the only perpetrators of sexual assault. It's an incredibly dangerous thing to say.
The issue,
I think all sexual assault and rape is bad. That doesn't mean that we should continue to import people who have a higher proclivity to engage in it.
But it's interesting that you're only concerned with Muslims. Again, you know, the real issue here, fundamentally, in the UK and the US, is less than 1% of acts of sexual violence being prosecuted. That's the big issue here. It's one of sexual violence.
I actually take issue with that.
I'm concerned when it's the mass importation and it creates a systemic culture where there are protected classes of people that police won't investigate because they're going to be racist.
I think the thing. Here's the thing. I think the point here is that on the issue of multiculturalism, particularly in the UK, we've not been honest. So a point that you made that I think is important.
I think that's key to this.
We've not been honest. So people.
There was a general terror. Actually, Jordan Peterson was right about this. The terror came from 2 different thought processes. One of fear of revenge attacks by extremists, which I think was very real at the time a lot of this was going on. ISIS were doing despicable things all over the country and around the world. I think it was a genuine fear that people had. And secondly, a fear of being labeled racist.
Well, but this is the thing. People have such short memories in this country. The 2005 Birmingham riots were ignited because of a rumor of a Black Caribbean girl being gang raped by British Pakistani men. Right. And that was linked to the death of 2 men. This idea that multiculturalism just works and you just have these, fringe people. Yes, usually these riots and violence are led by fringe people. But the idea that everything is hunky-dory between communities is a complete lie.
No, they're not.
If you look at many Black British communities in this country, a lot of the racial strife are with South Asian communities.
Listen, I don't think
we've just not been honest about it.
No community is blameless. No community can hold their hands up and say we are without sin. The particularly gruesome aspect of this, as Jordan Peterson said, is the sustained period it went on with everybody.
And the race of the victims. I'm sorry, if they were, if these were black British girls and black communities had found out that their girls were being sadistically raped in this way, there is not a soul in the country that could call any of them racist for wanting justice.
Yeah,
and I'm sorry, this boils down to the fact that we're not honest about multiculturalism in this country. And to say that, oh, it's because, you know, nobody wanted to offend the Muslims. No, it's also because the victims were white and working class and nobody cared.
Yeah,
okay.
The people that have threatened Jess Phillips have been arrested within 48 hours. There have been thousands of victims of these rape gangs in this country that have not even seen their attacker go to prison. So that's a big point.
But why aren't we talking about the police? Why aren't we talking about the police who, in that report, were shown to have repeatedly failed to to believe that they were credible witnesses?
Some of them were tipping off their attackers.
Yes, but what?
If crimes were taking place, they should have been arrested, go to court, and let the law take its course. But to try to broad brush a whole community a decade later after this stuff happened and bring these fucking slut, whatever the fuck she is, all of a sudden she's an expert on the Quran and she doesn't know anything about our religion. She's just spitting shit she's been taught. These are talking points. And it's a shame on you, Piers Morgan, for having such garbage on your show.
Why
the police got into victim blaming. They were accusing the girls of being drunk and leading these guys on. I mean, at every level, there was a systemic failure of these girls. And that's why I think there should be a new, independent, wide-ranging national inquiry into this specific scandal, not wide-ranging into all sorts of other areas of sexual abuse generally or whatever. Make it about the gang rape scandal in the north of England. And put serious people in charge who have nothing to do with politics, and let's get to the bottom of it, and let's work out who got raped, who did the raping, and who covered it up, and hold them, the last two, all to account. I've got to leave it there. Thank you all very much.
All right, go fuck yourself. All right, ladies and gentlemen, today's show was all nothing but Islamophobia. The whole show had nothing to do with going to the facts or even talking about the girls who got raped in the gang rape, whatever it was. Instead of blaming a certain individual or gangs of people, they try to connect the faith of 2 billion people to these crimes. They were just, today's whole show was just a mirage to use that as a platform to spit anti-Islamic propaganda. That's all it was. And shame on you, and shame on this fucking guy, Piers Morgan. I think he should be boycotted, that motherfucker, because he's bringing all this shit. He refused to challenge that bitch when she said, "Oh, Islamophobia and pedophilia in the Quran. I read it all." You didn't read shit. All right, man. I gotta go, man. Fuck it all, man. I see ya. This was a lazy show, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah.